Hey everyone, welcome to the second orientation for F1TENTH Sim Racing League at CDC 2024. Uh, we would like to acknowledge the different people that have made this competition possible. Although Chinmay and I would be doing most of the talking today, it is their collective effort that this competition has been made possible. So a huge shout out to them. Uh, Getting started, basics. First of all, how do you or we get in touch with each other? The first and foremost platform for that would be the competition website, where we will be posting announcements or any other material or content based on the competition. And that's where you can go and see for the first uh, time. And there are also links linked out from the competition website to different platforms or channels that we can use for communication. One of them is the Slack workspace, which is now being actively participated in with different people across the competition, and it's a best place to basically have general discussions. If you're facing any issues, post them. If you have any suggestions, post them there. If you have any answers to the questions that are being asked there, you can also feel free to answer them. If you have faced similar problems and have found potential solutions, that's kind of a collaborative space where we can help out each other. Not just us as organizers, but even participants can help out each other if that's possible. And finally, there is the GitHub repository where you can potentially send out an issue or a pull request if there are any technical uh, contributions or issues that you are facing, especially related to the competition framework. If none of these three channels is adequate for your concerns, you can potentially send out an email to us directly to our email IDs, because all the other channels that I mentioned are publicly viewable. So if there is something that you want to be discussed via email, that's possible. But the only reason that we keep email as the last priority is because different organizations have different spam filters, and your email may or may not get through to us, especially within time. So it's kind of a last resort where we generally ask you to use the Slack channel for general discussions, but if required, you can of course send an email to us. So here is a brief out agenda of what we'll be talking about today. Like the first orientation, we will be going over the competition overview. We'll be talking about rules and regulations, some key technical aspects, and then we will have a few demos to help you get started. And there is also a few updates to the competition framework, so we'll be discussing that. And finally, there will be questions that you can ask. So, uh, generic competition overview. This competition is a part of the 22nd F1TENTH Autonomous Racing Grand Prix, and there are two aspects of it. The first one is the physical racing league, where there is in-person competition that will happen at CDC, and this will be with physical F1TENTH race cars and racetrack in a time trial format for qualification round, and followed by a head-to-head racing in the competition phase. Uh, what we will be discussing mostly today is the Sim Racing League, which would be a virtual competition held ahead of CDC. And this would, of course, comprise of virtual F1TENTH race cars and a racetrack in the Auto Drive Simulator. And the format for this race would be a time attack racing format where both the qualification and competition phases will be a single vehicle racing around the track and timed for the metrics that will be used to evaluate the standings of each participant. So here is a general timeline of how the competition will be and what are the different phases. So of course, we have already finished with registration and the first orientation. Today we are at the second orientation. Following this, we will be having the qualification round where you will have to demonstrate successful completion of 10 laps around the practice track provided ahead of time, the same track that has been given to you in the simulator that you have been using over the past few weeks. And following that, we will be releasing the competition track just ahead of the final race, where your algorithms are supposed to be robust enough to now accommodate the changes in the new track. Then, of course, we'll have the final race where, again, as the qualification round, we will collect your containerized algorithms and interface them with the containerized simulator on our end and log all the performance metrics. And finally, the results will be declared and the standings of all the teams will be released uh, in a few days after the final race. So date and time wise, this is the timeline that you see on the competition website. We are today at the second online orientation right here, but there are, of course, the qualification round is scheduled to be on the 30th of November, which means basically you will be submitting your solutions by 29th. And we will be declaring the results for the qualification on the 2nd of December. If there are a lot of submissions, it may shift to the 3rd of December or something, but we will try our best to keep it the 2nd of December. 6th of December, we are tentatively planning to release the competition track, and you will be basically then submitting your solutions on 7th of December, and we'll be evaluating from 7th through 8th, and finally declaring the results on 9th or 10th of the December. A few competition resources that, in case you are not already aware of, this is a screenshot from the website. So everything that you see here is available, or links are available on the website. The first one is the different documents. First is the rule book, and the second is the technical documentation, where if you are not familiar with the framework already, or if you are facing any issues, you can feel free to refer to the technical guide to get more in-depth explanation and documentation for the simulator as well as the dev kit. We also have provided the baseline container images for both the simulator and the dev kit. And up till now, the explore track and the practice track has been released. The explore is basically a flat ground concrete floor with the F1TENTH on it. And it's basically meant for kind of system identification or any other experiments that you want to run with the F1TENTH. And the practice track is basically the Porto track digital twin, which will be also used for the qualification round. And of course, we have not yet released the competition or compete tag of the containers. That will be released just a few days ahead of the final race. Same with local resources. We have already released the simulator and dev kit local versions for both explore and practice tags, and compete tag will be updated a few days ahead of the final race. Finally, the orientation resources for the first orientation have also been released in the form of recordings as well as slides, and we will also make sure to release the resources and recordings for today's orientation in a few days after orientation. So quickly brushing over a few rules and regulations. We'll first talk about general guidelines, then competition guidelines, and finally submission guidelines. But there are a few things to keep in mind again. First of all, rules can change potentially, and we will make sure to keep you guys updated on if there are any changes to the rules via Slack channels. But the idea is that we cannot always judge the competition ahead of time. There can be situations that demand updating or creating new rules on the go, and that's the reason for this rule book to be amendable. The second thing is about ethical principles of the competition. This is a global standard competition, and we of course ask everyone to be ethical in terms of developing your solutions and submitting them. That doesn't mean that you don't have open source accessibility. That is definitely there, but we just ask that you credit the original authors of any code that you may use or any other algorithms or frameworks that you may directly borrow off the shelf. And finally, of course, as with any competition, the referee's decision will be final. But if you have any claims, we will need supporting evidence to entertain your rebuttals. And of course, the decisions will again be at the organizer's discretion. So here are a few general guidelines. Eligibility criteria, since most of you registered, you already would be aware of this, that the competition is open for everyone around the world, irrespective of the age, the profession, or anything else. And the registration for the Sim Racing League is free of cost. This is separate from the conference registration itself, as well as the physical F1TENTH racing competition, which may have their own registration costs. The competition structure would be in the form where we will be providing each of the teams with the standardized simulation setup and the dev kit, as you might already have started exploring, and the teams would be now, that is your responsibility to develop the perception planning and control algorithms to race autonomously. And there will be two phases of the competition. First would be a qualification race where the time to completion would not matter so much, but it's the safety, that is the 10 laps of consecutive racing that you would have to show. And teams that qualify for 10 consecutive laps will then progress to the final time attack race, where you will now be timed. And of course, the time will matter because you will be put head to head with other uh, participants, not on the racetrack, but on the time board to make sure that the standings are clear. So coming to the competition specific guidelines, as I said, the competition is a time attack racing format where each participant will race against the clock independently, but on the same racetrack. That is, we won't change racetrack from one participant to the other. And I have been saying 10 laps, but in essence, there will be 12 laps for the competition, where you will be starting with a warm-up lap and finishing with a cool down lap, which won't be timed, or the collisions in these laps will also not be considered. But the 10 laps that I have been alluding to are the middle 10 laps, which are called or termed the race laps, which will be both timed and kept check for collision counts. A general guideline of evaluation criteria would be that the ultimate criterion would be always the total race time that you have put on the board. But in cases where there are ties, or in other extreme cases or special cases, we would also consider best lap time or other metrics to help distinguish the different participants on the leaderboard. A collision, if it occurs, will incur a penalty of 10 seconds. This is a simple penalty of 10 seconds at each collision, which basically means 10 seconds for the first one. After the second collision, you will already have a 20-second penalty, and third, you will have 30 seconds, and so on. And the maximum number of collisions permissible would be 10. That is set as one maximum collision per lap. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to collide once per lap, or you are allowed to collide once per lap. It is basically, and it is not even set to check once per lap. It is more of a total count that we will be keeping into account, where if you don't collide for the first 9 laps, and if you collide 11 times in the 10th lap, that will also lead to a disqualification. And lastly, as I mentioned, the times or collisions for the warm up and cool down laps will not be considered, and only those for the 10 race laps will be considered. So coming to the submission process, this is now important since you will soon have to submit your code for the or containers for the qualification round. The first and foremost thing that we ask is that your containers be self-sustainable in terms of autonomous racing stack. And that means that when we run your container, it should automatically source all the packages that you may have, launch all the nodes or scripts that you may have, load all the parameters, basically do everything from warm up to starting the autonomous race. And when we interface it with the simulator, in the sense that we hit the connect button on the simulator, it should directly start using the stream of topics to race autonomously. We would not have the time or bandwidth to get into the different instructions that you may have to run the stack from our side. And that's more important, since we may or may not, or we don't definitely have access to the code that you have developed. So we of course don't know the right sequence or the right commands to be run. And that's why it's very important that you have your containers set up to be self-sustainable in terms of running the autonomous racing stack. A side note here as well is that whenever you kind of want to execute a sequence of commands, we ask you to do that in the entry point script for the Docker container. Please don't do that from the bash RC file, because we will need to launch another terminal instance from the container to record the data and all of the other things that we uh, generally do for the competition. So if you put all the command executions within bash RC, it will rerun them every time we instantiate a new bash session. So the overall takeaway here is, please don't use bash RC to, you can use that to source workspaces and other things, but not executing any of the commands or any of the scripts that you want to as a part of your algorithm. Please do that in the entry point script for the Docker container that is already sitting inside the container. And we have also provided the documentation regarding that in the technical guide. So the second step after containerizing your algorithms and making sure that they are self-sustainable is to push them to Docker Hub. And finally, we will be sharing a form, a similar kind of form that we have for registration to now enable all the teams to share their Docker Hub links with us securely. And that basically restricts it from others being able to access your containers. A few notes about submission privacy. First of all, for maintaining your code base, it's best practice to use Git or other version control systems so that you don't lose access to your code or can roll back to any earlier version in the time. But that, of course, means that it needs to be hosted somewhere in the cloud. And if you are intending to do that, we ask that you can use private GitHub repositories to make sure that your code stays uh, hidden from anyone in the outer world. And same applies with containers. You can store your containers on Docker Hub, and Docker Hub does offer one private repository per free account. So you can also take advantage of that. If you already have a Docker Hub account that uses a private repository, you can just create a new one, and that will basically give you access to another private repository to the new account to now store the competition specific image there. And this applies only till the final results are declared. After the competition, we of course encourage all the teams, or if you are interested, to publish your code, your Docker images, and other race data if you may have in form of videos, logs, or reports, as well as if there are any publication resulting out of it publicly, so that others in the community can learn from your experience and basically build this competition after each iteration. A few technical aspects now that Chinmay will be going over.
Thanks, Tanmay. So we will now be delving into the technical aspects for this competition. Most of this will be a reiteration from the first orientation, and most of these things have already been documented into the technical guide that we have released. It's like a pretty detailed documentation of all the technical aspects pertaining to the competition framework, including the simulator as well as the dev kit. And as and when we roll out new changes or modifications, we will be sure to update the technical guide upstream so that all of that information is available at your fingertips at any point in time. So here is a glimpse of what the framework generally or looks like from a high level. We are having a pretty detailed simulation in terms of both the physics as well as the graphics for the F1TENTH vehicle, which we have tried to calibrate as close to the real world vehicle that we have in our lab as much possible. So this video is like an overview video that most of you would have watched at an earlier point in time or would have already kind of gotten a glimpse of this from exploring the competition framework yourself. But this video basically gives out the high level ideas that are possible with the competition framework. Not necessarily all of them are a part of the competition, currently at least. We may include some of these features into the future competition iterations, but this video is to give you an idea of what the competition framework is really capable of. And you can basically also try to use this in your research or academic settings beyond the competition itself, wherein you can now feel free to explore other aspects of the competition framework and let that help you with your academic pursuits or research or any other endeavors that you wish to pursue. So in the next section, we have the technical guide itself. So the technical guide at a high level comprises of three things. One is the details pertaining to the simulator, the details pertaining to the dev kit, and finally details pertaining to the competition submission. So as a high level note here, we do expect some experience from the teams in terms of different programming languages or constructs, concepts, frameworks, containerization, version control, etc. It is not necessary that all the members of the team have to have these expertise, but it can also be, or it is also a good idea to have people from different domains. For example, people who are good programmers, people who are conversant with ROS2, people who are good with containerization, and generally most of you would be aware of version control or would have practiced it at some point in time. So you can also choose to mix and match between your teammates to now handle the tasks and allocate the tasks accordingly. As an information, we also have highlighted the exact specifications of the workstation that we would be running the competition on. And this is also available in the slides as well as the technical guide that we have released. So it is just a general guideline to have or at least keep an idea of this at the back of your head when you are developing your algorithm, so that you have an idea of the configuration of the workstation that they would be ultimately deployed on and evaluated on. So now let us talk about the simulator itself. First of all, on the right hand side, you can see the graphical depiction of the simulator in GUI mode. So in the technical guide, we have tried to mention the system requirements that are required to run the simulator, and these are to get this functionally running. There might be additional requirements that every computer is built different. So in terms of like super optimal performance, there might be a few things that may or may not work on a very specific computer, but the general guidelines have been posted in the system requirements in the technical guide. And this is across different platforms. So uh, different operating systems and different hardware configurations, and that they of course have their own nuances in terms of how they squeeze out performance, what they prioritize in terms of scheduling and other things. But we have tried to keep this as generalizable as possible. Next, we have information pertaining to the user interface, wherein even in the screenshot that you can see, we have a menu panel on the left hand side to control the different aspects of the simulation. And then on the right hand side, we have a heads up display, which kind of gives you the simulation information, the sensor streams, as well as the race metrics in terms of the lap timings and counts in real time. We have also added a recording functionality that helps you record data. And this data is time synchronized data for all the different vehicle sensor streams and states. And this can be very helpful in terms of devising imitation learning based autonomy algorithms, or in general just recording this data for uh, analysis and post processing. So apart from that, we have also highlighted the details pertaining to the vehicle, that is F1TENTH vehicle, in the documentation. This includes all the different transforms for the vehicle as well as different sensors, their locations, etc. Information pertaining to the vehicle dynamics, as well as the sensor physics. So how is it being simulated, or what kind of data you can expect as streams, etc. Uh, we have tried to be as detailed as possible without giving away too much information that may lead to misuse of these details. And then again, we have similar information pertaining to the environment as well, wherein we have detailed all the transforms, the size and structure of the racetrack, as well as the design and features that you might expect to vary across the different racetracks at different phases or iterations of the competition. Next up, we have details pertaining to the dev kit. Here again, we have tried to highlight the system requirements from a general point of view as much as possible. We have also highlighted the package structure, wherein we have detailed about the AutoDrive F110 package that we have developed and released as a part of this competition framework. And we do expect that every team develops their own package within the same workspace. And as again, to reiterate, sourcing the workspace or other aspects, we have already tried to take care of that from the competition framework perspective. But if you are changing anything, or you need any additional sourcing, or if you need additional sequence of steps that need to be executed before the algorithm runs correctly, please make sure to do so in the entry point script provided. Then we have information pertaining to the data streams, all the different topics that are exposed, the types and message definitions, as well as the type of access. So certain topics are restricted, certain topics are open. These can be inputs or outputs. All of that has been mentioned on the competition website in the technical guide. So let us now come to the final piece, which is competition submission. And this is what would be concerning most of you right now, since the submission deadlines are approaching. So first of all, we have details pertaining to the container setup. Here we have highlighted how you could pull the containers that we have provided, as well as use them in terms of the execution as well, and developing your own algorithms. Then we have some tips or best practices pertaining to container troubleshooting, and some guidelines pertaining to algorithm development, and again instructions as well as guidelines and tips pertaining to the container submission. So the graphic that you see on the right hand side, that's the high level overview of how we would be deploying and evaluating the containers from our side, as well as this is how you would be basically running them from your side as well for developing, debugging, and continuous development. So here, one of the things that I would like to highlight is the simulator container image and the dev kit container image may or may not be container images. They could be local resources when you are developing your algorithms. Um, and this is basically to take away the initial learning curve that's necessary for getting started with containers and things as such. If you're not familiar with those processes, they might be overwhelming. So you can basically have a part of your team dedicate towards understanding container architectures and all of those kinds of aspects, while the other portion uh, focuses more on the development aspects. We have also observed that Docker and GPUs are not really a good combination. So you can also use the instead of using the simulator container image, you can choose to use the simulator local version with the dev kit container image. And basically you can mix and match and it doesn't really matter. It works and we have tested that. So functionality, so it's not a problem if you use the dev kit container image to develop and push your algorithms upstream while testing them with the local version of the simulator. One important thing to highlight again is that the simulator as well as DevKit supports distributed computing mode. So in case you have multiple computers, but none of them are very great in terms of handling workloads, or they are uh, not very powerful, you can choose to run the simulator and DevKit on different machines. The only requirement that you would have here is that these two machines would need to communicate with each other via a common network. And this network, again, need not be very enterprise grade or very powerful, but it is good to have it as powerful as possible so that you have the real-time data streaming possible from the simulator and dev kit. And general idea would be to use a dedicated router or Ethernet connection to now establish this communication. Because if you have a low bandwidth on your communication channel and you are trying to use it for other purposes as well, it might slow down the communication rate between the simulator and the dev kit. So that's just one highlight. And then again, another aspect again for performance optimization is that you can choose to run the simulator as well as the dev kit in either graphical or headless modes. So in graphical modes, you can basically, for the simulator, it has been depicted that you can basically visualize all of this. It's not entirely necessary to do that. You can basically choose to use the headless mode of the simulator, and that could look something like what you see on the right hand side of the image. Um, but everything would be functional except for the cameras, because headless mode would disable the rendering and making the camera feed basically null. So there won't be any errors, but just that the camera feed will not update over time, and it will basically contain a blank image when you try to access it from the dev kit side.
So the reason that we have established the graphical versus headless mode is, as Chinmay highlighted in one of the earlier slides, Docker and GPUs don't work great, and each driver version of the GPU, the hardware itself, or the operating system, all of those things now come into the picture when you are trying to access the GPU. And this becomes more difficult if when you're trying to access the GPU from a container. And so we have basically established the headless mode to make sure that the rendering is disabled, which basically means that you don't need the GPU access anymore to run the simulator. And all of your simulation data, except for the camera, because the rendering is disabled, will be made available to the dev kit without any GPU constraints.
So with that, now let us dive into some demonstration pieces. So first of all, let us quickly walk you through the competition website. This may or may not be necessary because you, at this point, at least most of you would have accessed the competition website multiple times. You would have explored the different resources and other things. But in case you might have missed something, let us quickly try to show you or point you towards the different important things on the competition website. So this is the competition website for CDC 2024. So first of all, we have some general information about the competition and organizers. Then this is one of the important pieces wherein we have updated timeline for the competition as it's going to proceed further. So as Tanmay highlighted earlier, we are already at orientation session 2 on November 23rd. And here are the few phases that are or items that are left for the competition. Some of these things or most of these things will remain as scheduled currently, but there might be circumstances wherein we might need to reschedule things, and we will be updating that on the competition timeline. So please do keep checking this timeline for any updates and like plan accordingly. And this is just a summary of each of the events that has been mentioned in the timeline so that you understand what each event means. This is again an important information wherein we have tried to highlight that the actual competition would be held approximately 1 week ahead of CDC. And another thing that I would like to highlight over here is that we are in discussion with the conference organizers, and it seems that there would be most likely than not a special session at CDC that would be dedicated to the sim racing league, wherein people can join online or in person to discuss their approach or results and their findings uh, from this competition. This is basically your opportunity to brag about your cool algorithms that you are developing and working on all these days, and kind of try to highlight what new approaches you have tried out, how beneficial it was, and how it optimized the performance, etc. Then the next section talks about the different resources that we have for the competition. And again, a very important note here, we have been observing some doubts on different forums that basically ask uh, that the dev kit and the simulator are not working, or they don't give this data, that data, etc. So one of the things that I would like to reiterate and clearly highlight again is that all of the data that all of the framework that you kind of download and run your evaluations on should be from this competition website resources section. So it may be the different containers or it may be the local resources. Please stick to this uh, two sections only and exclusively for the competition. There are other releases that we have for Auto Drive Simulator and Auto Drive Dev Kit in general. Some of them also include the F1TENTH vehicle, but they are not a part of the competition. The only competition framework that you should access and should use is from this website that has been highlighted in the resources section. Also, another thing to highlight that we have an earlier deployment of this competition at IROS. So please also try to avoid confusion between the resources from IROS and CDC, especially because we have uh, updated certain things and we have tested them to work with the specific versions of the dev kit. And these may not be backward compatible in some cases. So please make sure that you understand that the only resources that you should use for the competition are from this particular competition website. Other resources include the competition rules, wherein we have a detailed rule book to highlight what are the different rules and regulations for the competition, how it would be conducted, what are the codes of conduct, etc. And then you have the technical guide, which kind of highlights in a very detailed manner the different technical aspects of the competition framework. So finally, we have orientation resources. So the meeting links as well as for reviewing the material. We have the recordings from the meeting as well as the slides. So we already have that for orientation session 1, and we would be doing similar for the session 2 in the coming days. So maybe let us quickly skim through the rule book at this point. So as I mentioned, we have general guidelines as well as competition specific guidelines that we have tried to highlight from a high level in the slides as well. But in case you want a detailed information on that, we do have all of that information at your fingertips in the rule book that we have released. And again, from competition to competition, these things might be updated, but they will be definitely mentioned on the competition website and the updated rule books. The other aspect is the technical guide. So here again, as I mentioned, this would be continuously updated to make sure that if we are making any changes to the competition framework, they are reflected in the technical guide. And again, here, this is a pretty detailed guide that talks about the different aspects that I kind of covered in a high level in the slides, but here you can find all of that information in a pretty detailed documentation for the simulator as well as the dev kit. And finally, also for helping you with the containerization, setup, execution, testing, as well as some debugging tips. And finally, even some submission guidelines that are best practices or recommendations from our side. So all of this information is available at your fingertips. And one thing to highlight again, for example, is one of the recent changes that we have made. So we have added a simulator reset functionality from the API. We will be talking about that in one of the future slides. But just to highlight here that we have that information now within the technical guide, and we have also certain warnings or aspects of that mentioned. So, for example, when you are trying to reset the simulator via API, first of all, this functionality is built in such a way that it resets the simulation without disrupting the communication between simulator and devkit. And when you try to reset by publishing a Boolean message on the auto drive reset command topic, you would also need to make this Boolean false immediately after the simulation has been reset. Otherwise, it will get stuck in a loop where it continuously resets the simulation, and you might not be aware of why this is happening, and you might think that that is a bug, or it might the simulator has frozen or something like that. But please keep this information in mind when you are trying to reset your simulations. Then finally, as I mentioned, we have information pertaining to the competition submission, which includes all the details for setting up, executing, evaluating, testing, troubleshooting, and finally, even submitting your containers as solutions.
So one thing that you can potentially use to see or check whether anything on the competition website, including the resources, the technical guide, or the rule book has been updated, is the note at the end of each web page, which basically shows the timestamp at which it was last updated. This can come in handy if you are just looking or checking back if there are any updates, and if that number or that date stamp has changed, you basically know that there has been an update, and you can basically check or like if you have any doubts, you can even ask on the Slack or other forums to know what exactly the updates are.
So with those resources, again, here is a note that some of you may have missed, which contains the links to the Slack workspace as well as other communication channels that Tanmay discussed in one of the earlier slides. And then information pertaining to the registration, which most of you have already accomplished. And then this is where we would be releasing the submission forms, and this is where the results and standings for all the teams would be announced.
So one last thing, again, for the qualification phase, we will of course be releasing the standings, but those will be just for you to know how you stand against your fellow participants, and will not be used for any ranking or final results of the competition.
So with that, the next demo is pertaining to the framework setup and usage. So we have a short but detailed video pertaining to the entire workflow for setting up the competition framework and running it. This is publicly made available via the competition website. It is also included in the slides for your reference. So in this video, what we basically do is a complete walkthrough of setting up the competition framework that includes both the simulator as well as the DevKit containers. We are demonstrating this from a Linux machine, but we have also tested this to work on other machines, including Windows and Mac OS. So the cross-platform support is available. And as I mentioned, there might be differences in terms of the machines that we have tested this on and the machines that you are using. So we have also provided local resources as opposed to the just the containers in case you get stuck with the containerization or the container GPU communication issues. And that could basically be a very good starting point for you to now refer to how you set up the competition framework. And as I highlighted, it does not matter if you are using containers or local versions. You can basically choose to, for example, use the devkit container with a local version of the simulator, and that works just fine. The only thing I would like to highlight here is that the reason that you might want to do such a thing is because the devkit container is what you will be submitting as a submission from your side. You should not or do not need to submit the simulator container to us. And so you can choose to run the simulator in whichever way is comfortable or compatible with your system. It could be containerized, it could be a local version, and it could also be running on a different machine that uses a different operating system, for example, in a distributed computing mode that I just talked about earlier. So all of that information has been condensed in this approximately 5-minute video, if I'm not wrong. And it's like we have tried to keep this video as short as possible so that it's not too boring or not unnecessarily long, and can be a quick reference point for you in case of your development and debugging processes. Finally, this is one of the important updates that we have recently pushed. Some of you had requested a simulator reset functionality. We already had that in place via the simulator itself. If you look at the reset functionality over here, but we have also updated the functionality to work via the API now. One thing to note here is that the reset functionality that is built into the simulator is a hard reset. So it basically resets everything that's in the simulation, including the simulation time, for example, as well as disrupting the communication bridge between the simulator and the dev kit. But that is something that we did not want to happen via the API, because it's useless if you kind of reset the simulator via the API and then the API communication is broken. So what we have tried to do is add a soft reset functionality, which resets most of the important things that are in the simulation. For example, the vehicle pose or the sensor streams, the lap counts, lap times, etc. All of those things are reset. But certain things like, for example, the simulation time will continue progressing. It should not matter, but it will keep progressing. And most importantly, the communication between the simulator and the dev kit will not break. Here, what you see in the video is a glimpse of that. So we did add the functionality and made upstream changes to the containers and local versions. But then we also went ahead and pushed another recent update wherein we have uh, teleoperation. If you launch the teleoperation node now, you would have an additional reset functionality with the key R on your keyboard. So if you launch the teleop node and you hit the button R, it will reset the simulation via API. And this can be, first of all, for you to test the reset functionality. But more importantly, you can choose to look at the reference implementation that we have to understand how it works. Because one small caveat that I mentioned is when you reset the simulator, you will also need to set the Boolean message for the reset command to false again, so that the simulator comes back into the normal simulation mode and does not keep resetting one after the other instance. The other aspect here is that, similar to the throttle and steering commands that you would be sending to the vehicle, the reset command would also be only working under the case where the vehicle is running in autonomous mode. And this could also, for example, help you in developing RL algorithms where you are trying to reset the vehicle after each episode, or other aspects of development that you may choose to use this functionality for. And finally, that brings us to the end of this orientation session or presentation. But you can feel free to check out and explore other resources pertaining to AutoDrive ecosystem in general. And again, to reiterate and highlight the fact that there are releases pertaining to simulator as well as dev kit out there. There are numerous releases and publicly available versions of simulator and dev kit. Some of them also include the F110 vehicle, but those are not the versions that you should be using for developing your algorithms for the competition, because the competition framework itself is completely different from all of these different versions, and these other versions may or may not have the exact same specifications for that we need the competition framework to run. So please make sure that you stick to the competition website under the resources section. Those are the only places where you should go to download and use the containerized or local versions of the simulator and dev kit. So with that, we have come to the end of the second online orientation of the F110 Sim Racing League at CDC 2024. Please again feel free to reach out in case you have any questions or are facing any issues via Slack workspace or other communication channels that we have mentioned. And as I mentioned again, the recordings as well as slides for this session as well will be made available online for you to refer at your fingertips. And basically, that is it from our end. Thanks a lot for your participation in the competition.